and welcome to another episode of Immigration and Mobility Decoded. Thank you all for tuning in. Very exciting. You might notice that this is an in-person podcast recording. It's our first one, and to commemorate the occasion, today I am joined by Arturo Castellanos. Arturo, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me back, Eric, and delighted to be here at this beautiful studio.
Yes, we are both in Washington, D.C., courtesy of Switch and Board Podcast Studios. Highly recommend them. It's kind of cold out today, and this week, Arturo, you've been here for about a week or so. So glad we're able to catch up and chat immigration, National Immigration Forum, and things on the horizon.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure being here in such a beautiful city and in good company with you, Eric. Good to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you again. Appreciate the kind words. And thank you so much for hopping on. Before we started recording, we were chatting that last year, I think you were the third or fourth episode of when we launched our podcast series, and your episode was very popular throughout the year. So very much looking forward to continuing this conversation, continuing this friendship and relationship. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Honestly, I'm very happy that you say that because it was my debut in the podcast world. So I'm glad we did well.
Yes, exactly.
And hopefully those invitations will keep coming.
Totally. So Arturo, before we have a lot of great topics to discuss, but when I just wanted to get started, just talking a little bit more about discussing your background. You have a very interesting and really romantic background. So can you just talk about your personal immigration story to the U.S.?
Absolutely. One of the reasons why I started working in the immigration advocacy field is because I'm an immigrant myself. I came to the United States 7 years ago, a little bit over 7 years. And now that we have a St. Valentine's occasion to talk about this, let me tell you the story why I came to the U.S. 7 years ago. The day was May 3rd, 2013. And I remember the exact date because it was only one day before I turned 25. Okay. I was watching President Barack Obama deliver one of the most incredible speeches I've heard in my entire life. He was delivering a speech to Mexican students at the Mexican Museum of Anthropology. Mm-hmm. He was citing Mexican authors speaking Spanglish and giving a great speech about hope. And I was delighted to be hearing those words coming from an American president. And suddenly, in the middle of the speech, a good friend of mine called me saying he was about to get engaged. He was going to propose, and he wanted me to be part of that celebration. So, of course, I was super happy for him. I went to the celebration, had fun with him, and in the party, I couldn't stop talking about this wonderful speech, this marvelous speech from the U.S. from the American president. And fortunately, I didn't stop because on the 11th time that I kept talking about it, a good friend of mine said, "Oh, did you like it?" My best friend was sitting in the front row. She actually shook hands with Obama, and she said, "Nice to meet you, Mr. President." And he replied, "Nice to meet you." And I was like, "Oh my goodness, who is this lady, And she was like, yeah. And my friend, she's so cool that she was interviewed by CNN after the address, and her interview will be here tomorrow. So of course I was intrigued to know who this person was. So I set up my alarm clock, and the first time I saw who is now my wife was on CNN, giving an interview to CNN about the visit of President Barack Obama. So I immediately called this friend and said, please introduce me to Paulina. And she was like, yeah, of course, I'd be more than happy to introduce you. So we went, they were in a bar. And of course, my Paulina didn't know about my existence. So when we went to this bar, this friend said, Arturo, Paulina, Arturo. And I said, she doesn't need introduction. I already know her. She's famous from the TV. She's friends with Obama. And she looked at me like, what? Did you really watch that? And we spent 3 hours talking about Latin American literature, Aristotle. I promise it was a fun night. Despite we were in a bar, we were talking about those things. And she said, it's a pleasure to meet you. Let me tell you something. I'm on my way to start my process to go to the United States. I want to apply for the Fulbright scholarship. You're more than welcome to join me in the process. but I'm not waiting. So you can join me in this process. So we both decided to apply to come to do our graduate degrees in the United States. I did a Master of Laws. She eventually was awarded the Fulbright Scholarship, and she did a Master's in Public Administration. And during that time, I'm telling this story, I realized how lucky I was, or we were lucky, to move to the United States voluntarily, right? We had a choice. We wanted to come here to explore and fulfill our academic and personal and professional goals. But not everyone who comes to the United States has that freedom, that
Right.
liberty to choose. Some are forced to come here because they're facing persecution, fleeing gang violence, many other reasons why they come to the United States. But the goal is the same. We want to contribute to the workforce. We want to make this country a better place to live. We want to find a better way of life, and that's what excites me the most about working in the immigration advocacy field. Working with many like me who see this country as a place of opportunity.
Yeah. And the stats back it up, right, with the contributions of immigrants throughout the entire history of the United States. Go back to the founding of the country and up until now, the immigrant contributions. And we'll get into some of the additional studies in a bit and talk about them. But you look, if there weren't immigrants, the U.S. economy would not be number one in the world and continuing to grow as it is. But
Absolutely.
the quick in your article that you wrote about the meeting your now wife, I have to say I really enjoyed when you called out specifically what President Obama was talking about. You wrote in the middle of the speech when Obama was talking about the Mexican community in Little Village, Chicago. The reason I'm bringing that up is just because my parents grew up in Little Village.
Really?
Yes. Both sets of my grandparents are of Hispanic origin, came over from Mexico. And then my mom and dad were born and grew up in that Little Village area. So for a time, my grandparents, both sets, yeah, they both lived in the vicinity. So growing up, kind of was in that area too, and so yeah, just a little kind of like a third degree of separation in a way.
Well, that's amazing, and let me tell you, Chicago is perhaps one of my favorite cities in the United States, if not my favorite. 2 years ago, I had the pleasure and the privilege of running the Chicago Marathon, and about the time when I was running through La Villita, through Little Village, I was so exhausted, I wanted to start crying, but suddenly there was a mariachi band playing for the runners. And it's difficult to explain what that made in my brain, but I just kept going. I was happy. There were people giving out bananas and cheering on runners. So my favorite part of the Chicago Marathon is the part that goes through Little Village.
Yep. Are you training for this edition of the marathon or any other marathons?
I don't know. Let's see.
It's a commitment.
It's a commitment. And last year I ran a marathon. It didn't go as expected. So, but yeah, it's a great way to explore new cities in the United States. You run for 26 miles, exploring a new city. So why not? I would love to run in a new city in the U.S. hopefully.
What was the marathon that you ran in?
Detroit, which was gorgeous, and particularly for an immigration advocate, because it's one of the only few marathons in the world that crosses an international border. So you start in Detroit, cross to the Canadian side, and run for 1/4 of the kilometer of the marathon. In the Canadian side. Then you come back. So you cross one international bridge, you come back through an international tunnel, and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
It was a great experience as an immigration advocate, as a runner, and honestly, I was pleasantly surprised by how beautiful, vibrant Detroit is.
Yeah, Detroit is on the rebound. We might not always hear about it, but if you're living there, and I have a few friends that have visited, and it's on the upswing. Absolutely,
and with lots of personality. You can identify Detroit's own personality.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if someone out there wants to visit Detroit, I would definitely encourage you to go to visit Detroit.
For sure, definitely.
Yes.
So Arturo, moving on to the kind of one of the main topics of conversation. We're recording this at the end of January, early 2024. A little bit of back context, but I think the last time we chatted, we were still in the early part of the year when we were hearing from economists, politicians, anyone who had an opinion that 2023 was going to be the year of a recession in the U.S. That never happened. In fact, we're still dealing with a major labor shortage here. Latest statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics at the end of as of December 2023, there was a 3.7 unemployment rate and 8.8 million job openings. So Arturo, what role are immigrants playing in helping prevent an economic recession and continuing to help the U.S. economy grow, which as of I believe it grew up a little over 5% in Q4 of 2023?
You raise a very, very important point, and we at the National Immigration Forum have been closely monitoring the situation of the labor shortages affecting all the states in the United States. As you said, right now, this labor shortage looks, we are seeing only 5 available workers for every 9 job openings every month. And unemployment rate is at a very low 3.7% nationally. I know unemployment is one of those statistics that show that the economy is vibrant and it tends to be a good factor. But when it lasts for so long, it can be a symptom of a very big problem, the one that we're experiencing, that there aren't enough workers in the United States to tackle the labor shortage and to help the United States operate at full steam. And when we look, I mean, it's 3.7% nationally, but when we look to specific states, like for instance, Maryland and North Dakota, the unemployment rate has been below 2% for the last year. And I was very interested to see last week the U.S. Chamber of Commerce published that there are 1.7 million workers missing from the workforce compared to February 2020, right before the pandemic. And there are many reasons, or there are many explanations to try to understand why there are less workers in the United States. We are seeing a population that is rapidly aging, a population that is with a very low fertility rate of only 1.8 children per woman, which is below replacement. And fortunately, one of the aces under the sleeve of the United States is that it keeps attracting a lot of immigrants to the United States. In the past few years, the population has continued to grow, but it has grown very, very slowly. In 2021, we saw the slowest growth of the U.S. population in the history of the country, only 0.1%, perhaps accentuated by the pandemic. But then the following year, 2022, we saw a slight increase to 0.4%, which is good but not great. Right. Particularly, out of this 0.4%, 80% of the population growth was driven by immigrants, which I find fascinating. It's immigrants who continue to make this country a country of great economic opportunities and continue to help the economic growth.
And you mentioned some of the states that are having historically low unemployment rates, North Dakota, Maryland, and I'm sure there are a few others. In your studies and with your colleagues at the National Immigration Forum, have you guys discussed the current? We're seeing an influx of immigrants, seeking asylum, and they're currently living in cities where maybe the resources aren't there yet to help. Do you think there's ever a scenario where the U.S. government, whether it's now or in the future, changes the system to make it easier for these immigrants to work?
We're reaching a point where that's growing more and more important. Recently the U.S. Census Bureau published a really interesting radiography of the U.S. demographics, showing that there are 335 million people living in the United States, and 45 million of those are foreign-born. Mm-hmm. That represents 14% of the population. That's a number that keeps growing, still far from the early decades of the 20th century, when the percentage of foreign-born population was almost reaching 15%. So, and there are some people who argue that we are already beyond capacity of immigrants. I would say that's not true. Mm-hmm. Even compared to the U.S. Census Bureau calculations from 2017, the immigration levels are still 2 million below the expectations. So there's still a lot of room to grow, and we can bring more immigrants. And if the solutions don't come from the federal government, from Congress, from the administration in turn, we might start seeing some governments at state level advocating to make it easier for immigrants to stay and to go to those states. There are even though there are only 14% of the population is foreign-born, there are states where that percentage is even higher. Take, for instance, California. 1 in 4 persons in people in that state are immigrants, 26%. In New Jersey, that number is 23%. New York, 22%. Florida, 21%. So to your question, there is a definitely a growing interest among business leaders, faith leaders, law enforcement leaders all over the country advocating for a bipartisan immigration reform that reflects the need to bring in and retain the immigrants who are working in the United States.
You brought up a talking point or an opinion that I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on. You said there's that talking point being like, oh, we're full. There's no room to grow. How do you and the National Immigration Forum, I guess, push back on that, because it's not true?
It is not true, and when you take a look at some of the key industries that are essential for the United States, let's start. For instance, we try to bring arguments and data to the conversation, and let's take, for instance, what key industries are being affected by the lack of immigrants in the country, and why we should bring in more immigrants to help tackle the labor shortages and help the economy operate at full steam. In the country, there are in agriculture, 73% of the labor in agriculture is foreign-born. Worryingly, this is an industry where, due to the lack of available visas, around half of those 73% are undocumented. They're working in an industry that is essential for the United States. It's food security. So we're trying to show that in agriculture, we're missing many workers, and in an industry where we rely heavily on immigrants. The healthcare industry is the same. 28% of the surgeons in this country are immigrants. In the health, also in the STEM industry, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, we're seeing 24% of them are immigrants, many of them sons or daughters of immigrants, and the number of foreign-borns in these industries and sectors keep growing. And you know what? Immigrants not only are here to fill jobs, they're also creating jobs and opportunities. 28% of them run Main Street businesses, like laundromats, gas stations. So they are not only, filling jobs, but creating new jobs. So those are the arguments that we were trying to show.
Well, and a mega example of that is, look at some of the most well-known companies that we utilize every day. Google being probably one of the biggest, started by immigrants.
We could go on and on and on with a list of immigrants who came to the United States. Many of them came as international students. Yep. Others are sons or daughters of immigrants. I was, for instance, one of the founders and I mean, during the pandemic, the founder of Moderna is
Yes.
also an immigrant. And we could go on and on and on with a long list of immigrants who are developing great initiatives. There are some studies showing that bringing in more international students catapult the numbers of patents per capita in a country. So if the United States wants to remain competitive in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, producing innovative patents, it's important to keep bringing more international students.
Definitely. How much political capital do you think is needed to introduce and ultimately implement immigration reform? I know as we're speaking, there is a potential bipartisan solution working its way through the Senate. The specifics haven't been released yet, but I think that package is likely more focused on the southern border. But what we're talking about, the work visas, the employment visas, helping individuals as they come in through the asylum system, how much political capital is needed, and what has to happen in order for us to see that?
We have to engage in a frank and open conversation. This is a difficult topic that divides many, the topic of immigration. And that's something that we are at the National Immigration Forum are trying to identify the commonalities in the conversation. That's why we work very, very closely with groups of people that we consider unexpected allies in the immigration front. So we work closely with business leaders, with transnational companies who are struggling to hire, and they're telling us firsthand all the difficulties they are experiencing. So we are trying to bring these voices to Congress to show senators and representatives that people within their districts and states are struggling to hire, and they would benefit from a smart immigration reform. We're seeing the same thing with faith leaders. The congregations in the United States are shrinking. They are the message of the religions are messages of love, of loving thy neighbors. So that's why it's important to bring these conversations into the narrative, trying to convince the representatives and senators who may think that engaging in bipartisan immigration reform could be potentially losing votes. On the contrary, what we want to show them is that it would strengthen their candidacies, because this is something that a lot of people in the country want. I would dare to say that the vast majority.
Definitely. Going back to, you brought up some interesting statistics about the birth rate in the U.S. and kind of what that means moving forward. Towards the end of 2023, I believe it was the Census Bureau, which you referenced. They actually put out an interesting study/paper looking at birth rates in the U.S. and future population projections. And in that report, the U.S. population by 2080, it's projected to reach a high of almost 370 million before it starts to decline. And they put out a few different scenarios taking into account immigration or no immigration. And so going through some of those numbers, and then we can dive into them a little bit more. So by 2100, total population, if immigration is in the middle, as they call it, our population would reach 366 million. If immigration is in the high tier, high immigration, population would potentially be 435 million. And if not, the low immigration scenario, population in the U.S. is projected to peak at around 346 million in 2043, and then decline to approximately 319 million in the year 2100. They also introduced a scenario of a zero immigration, where that would project population declines starting theoretically this year if there is no foreign-born immigration, and the entire population would then decline to 226 million in 2100. And so I guess, just hearing these numbers, and we'll link the report in the episode description so everyone can check it out. I guess just what are your thoughts on a couple of these projections and numbers from the Census Bureau, with immigration, without immigration, zero immigration? They're
worrying, aren't they? I find them. I I'm an optimist by nature, so I try to see the glass half full, and I see this as a great opportunity to open our eyes as a country and try to be smart about how to bring in more immigrants, how to retain those who are already here. So I see it as a big opportunity to bring more immigrants, because this is not only affecting the United States. The population growth is affecting almost all the developing nations, or the developed nations out there. I'm not sure if this month there were two quotes from the Chinese and Russian governments, respectively, calling for women to have more children. They are particularly worried that those two countries are also starting to decline rapidly, and they don't have the net immigration rates that the United States does have. In China, they have a negative immigration rate. More people are leaving the country than those who are coming. Russia, it's a roller coaster of people going in and out. But the United States has a very robust influx of immigrants. Last year, after a very slow period of net immigration growth, the U.S. finally brought a little bit over 1 million immigrants to the U.S. That's what drove most of the population growth in the United States. So those numbers that you project, that the U.S. Census Bureau project, they're definitely worrying, but they're worrying only if we don't act upon them. We have that opportunity to see those statistics and try to figure out how can immigrants help the United States be as competitive as possible.
What programs or initiatives can the government, whether it's current administration or future administrations, take to achieve that high immigration scenario of, a population peak of 435 million in the year 2100?
The administrations have limited alternatives to increase the number of migrants, but they do have some things that they can do to improve the whole process. They can tackle the USCIS bottleneck that is affecting many migrants who are unable to get their work permits on time. I know the Biden administration has been working hard to reduce the backlog at U.S. consulates. We're starting to see some pilot programs where in Ireland, for instance, the United States is issuing electronic visas to specific Irish people, trying to see if that works. That would reduce the time that a passport and a visa has to go through many hands. We're seeing also a pilot program where some H-1B visa recipients do not have to go to their country of origin to renew their visa. They can renew their H-1B while being in the United States, which saves millions of dollars to many companies, to the employees themselves, and that make things more efficient. There are some alternatives being used. They're increasing the number of H-2Bs, H-2As that are available, reducing the bureaucracy around these. We could also start recapturing green cards. There are some efforts right now. The administration is discussing a notice of proposed rulemaking on updating Schedule A, which is a great alternative for the administration to make things easier for employers to bring in more immigrants. This is an occupational list of sectors that are experiencing labor shortages, and they don't have to go through all the labor certification process. So that's something going on with the current administration. And one topic that I'm particularly interested about is developing strategies to retain and attract international students. I'm biased because it's how I came to the United States, and one topic that I'm particularly interested in.
I guess, Trayson, going back to your journey. So I guess maybe for those who aren't aware of, how an international student might come to the U.S., you and other students came in on the F1 visa?
I came with an F1 visa.
And F1, just quick 101 synopsis.
F1 visa is the visa that one obtains in order to study in the United States.
And are you allowed to?
One of the many. That's the one that I got. That's the most popular one.
Yeah. And are you allowed to work on an F1?
That's an interesting point. I was allowed to work, but that was limited to on-campus work and up to 20 hours per week.
So the OPT.
That's after I graduate. After graduation, you are eligible for OPT. If that's for 12 months after you graduate. If, however, your degree was on the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, you can stay up to 36 months with an OPT. But while I was a student, I was unable to work, or I was able to work, but just on campus. And I argue that's one of the many, many reasons why the United States is perhaps losing international students to other countries.
Right. So, yeah, in 2022, the Department of Homeland Security Student and Exchange Visitor Information System, they received about 1.3 million international students in 2022, Arturo, and that was actually a 10% decrease from 2021. And if you compare it to pre-pandemic levels, that's still 10% below pre-pandemic levels. I do know, and I'm sure you know that the international student population had started to decline, during the Trump administration, but then COVID obviously had a played a huge factor into that, and so. What problems that you've identified that are contributing to the number of international students coming to the U.S. and why that's declining?
Thank you for raising that point, because some people think that just because the United States is by far the largest recipient of international students in the world, that there's nothing to fix. I think otherwise. Let me tell you why. Because although the U.S. is the largest recipient of international students, as you said, that number is declining. Just to compare what was happening in the year 2000, the U.S. had 28% of the global share of international students. In 24 years, that percentage has decreased to 15%. So we had lost 13% of the total share of international students to other countries that are doing things better than us, countries that are becoming more appealing and attractive for international students to go there and study. And it's a matter to be concerned of, because international students contributed over 37 billion with a B to the economy in 2022. And that represented a 4 billion decline compared to 2019. So it's particularly worrying from an economic standpoint, not only for what they give while they're here as students, but what they can give to the United States after they graduate. So it's important to pay attention and develop policies and strategies to retain and attract international students.
Under the current system, how can and what route do you typically see with students? So they come in on the F1, graduate, work on OPT or STEM OPT, and then what's the journey now, and is that working?
There are very few alternatives for international students who come to the United States to stay, reside, and work. The most popular one, as discussed, is the OPT, which allows F1 students to stay for up to 12 months and work here. If they went through a STEM program, they are eligible to stay up to 36 years. There are others.
36 months.
36 months. Yeah, it would be ideal for them to stay 36 years. 36 months. There are other students who come to the United States with J1 visa. That's another type of visa that allows a specific type of students to remain here. One that many medical students use, and unfortunately, after medical students graduate, they are forced to go back to their home countries for up to 2 years before becoming eligible to come back with a permanent visa. That is creating a lot of trouble for many in the United States, particularly at a time when there's a shortage of doctors. So that's one. Luckily for many Canadians and Mexicans like myself, there is also an opportunity to obtain a TN visa, but that's something that is only limited for Mexicans and Canadians. And also, there are many lucky and great candidates who obtain H-1B visas. They are eligible for H-1Bs after graduating, but these are competitive. the number is capped, and we've seen many of the problems going on with all the system. So, as I said, the options for international students are very limited.
And do you think that's playing? Do you think that's a factor when why the population could be declining when if you're an international student, you're looking at the U.S., you're going to come here to study, but then what are your options after graduating, compared to Canada? You mentioned Canada. I don't know the specifics off the top of my head, but I do know that they have a lot of programs in place to kind of make it easier for international students to go there, obtain a degree, and stay and work, and eventually put them on a path to permanent residency.
Of course, it is definitely one of the many factors that an individual or a couple may consider when finding where to do an international degree abroad. Canada, for instance, allows students and the spouses of students to work while one of them are obtaining the degrees. Not in the United States, we're limited to there. Also, you know how expensive graduate degrees are here in the United States. Some studies show that native-born American students, 85% of them rely on extracurricular work in order to pay for their tuition. That's not an option for many of the international students here in the United States, but it is somewhere else. So those are some of the factors that are reducing the appeal among international students and why the prestige of international education is declining.
Yeah. Do you, and this is us, this is probably you, like, you know, putting on if you were the immigration policy chief, do you think it would be beneficial if the U.S. were to create a dedicated path for students? So you mentioned the H-1B, the lottery is coming up in a few months. Those students are competing to obtain an H-1B with other professionals. If they're a first-time worker in the U.S. and they're trying to get an H-1B, do you think it would be beneficial to create a system, maybe replicating Canada, where you come in on an F1, put you on a path towards ultimately obtaining a green card?
Absolutely, that would be ideal. It would be beneficial for the state. It would be beneficial for the international students. Interestingly, the United States also has gives more leeway to the let's call them governors of the states. The states can apply for you as a candidate, depending on the labor shortages that they're experiencing. So if you are a potential good candidate to tackle one of those labor shortages, you become more easily eligible. And while I was in Mexico City, my hometown, I remember the Canadian Embassy organized plenty of fairs and events where they would showcase their universities, and they have great success. I mean, because it gives you a first-hand opportunity to see how your life would be like if you go to Canada, and the fact that the United States is the largest recipient of international students, perhaps they're not paying as much attention as other countries in doing that approach and that reaching out to potential prospective international students.
You mentioned, when we were talking about a few minutes ago about international students and their path after graduation. Obviously, there's the H-1B, but then there are alternatives to the H-1B, one being the TN visa, which you were on, correct?
Yes.
Just diving a little bit more into the TN, you put out an article how the TN to tackle labor shortages. I guess before we dive into that one, I guess can you just briefly explain the TN visa, what it is, and how it operates?
Of course, the TN visa is a visa that allows Mexicans and Canadians to work temporarily in the United States for up to 3 years, and with the potential to renew them indefinitely. This is a great visa that is uncapped. It is low cost for employees or employers. It is indefinitely renewable, and it helps to tackle labor shortages in the United States. And the great point about that as well is that I think diplomatically, it positively impacts the relations between the United States with the Canadian government and the Mexican government. So it's a great visa that stems from the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, now USMCA. And it is so good that after renegotiating NAFTA and turning into USMCA, they decided to keep it in place. And it has a high approval rate. It is honestly the most, as long as you demonstrate that you are that your profession belongs to a list of 60 something categories, you can work in the United States. So it's a great alternative with, as I suggest, the potential to replicate the model to other countries.
What aspects of the TN would you want to see replicated with, ideally?
For a while, I've been working on the potential to expand bilateral labor agreements with other countries, particularly because it would give the United States the potential to identify those specific areas where they need workers, and where perhaps there are too many workers or workers wanting to leave their countries of origin. So that the ability to identify those professions that where the United States need workers, professions and trades perhaps. The United States also needs agricultural workers. We could do it through a bilateral labor agreement with countries that are allies of the United States, where both would benefit, right? The United States would get the labor they need, and other countries with a more robust demographic, with a more robust population, perhaps where the unemployment rate is way higher, like Mexico, they could open that opportunity to work with countries that are close allies to the United States.
So Arturo, if thinking about replicating, I guess what would that look like in terms of process? Obviously, everything's got to go through the government, but what would that look like?
It wouldn't be easy. Yeah. Let's start with that. It wouldn't be easy, but it's not impossible, right? That's why we have that's why we got NAFTA. First, the administration, the executive power, which is in charge of negotiating, in charge of the foreign policy of the United States, would have to engage with other governments to see if there is a potential to start a bilateral labor agreement. If approved, that process, that potential treaty would have to be approved by the Senate. It would have to be approved also by the other countries' Congress. And after that, honestly, I mean, it sounds too easy, but it requires political will. Yeah. It requires to engage with strong diplomacy with other countries in the region and throughout the world, of people and bringing people who want to work here and may not be finding the professional alternatives that they want in their countries of origin. And also, interestingly, many of the countries like Mexico and many in the region, they heavily benefit from remittances. So it wouldn't be a brain drain from these countries. On the contrary, it would be an opportunity to bring more people here and send money to their countries.
Back home, yeah, for sure.
Back home.
So Arturo, as we're approaching on wrapping up, I think, final free flow of conversation. We are in an election year. We'll stay away from getting too far down that rabbit hole, but it is towards the end of the year. What does the 2024 hold for yourself in the National Immigration Forum, knowing that there is an election coming up and immigration policy may change starting next January?
What a question! But let me tell you, as I said, I'm an optimist by nature, and I work in an organization that is full of optimists. So we're trying to see this as an opportunity to have deep and frank conversations about what's the potential to use all the immigration force that wants to come to the United States and help tackle the labor shortages that the United States is experiencing. It will be a year where we, instead of creating divisive language, we have to build bridges. We have to be real diplomats, understanding that we all want to see the United States succeed. We may have a different approach to that success. There are many, many different ways, but understanding that we want the best for the country, that we have the best interests in mind of the people. That's what's going to help us move forward and hopefully have a 2025 where immigrants are playing an even larger role in the U.S. economy.
Similarly, how does your organization, work with, you mentioned businesses and other individuals who may not realize it, but they stand to benefit from immigrants? Let's say a company reaches out to you. What does that process or relationship look like?
Interesting. First, we see this as a symbiotic relationship where they benefit from our experience working with immigrants, and they give us the first-hand information of how they're struggling to find workers, right? So based on the information that they provide, we try to write papers, policy papers, showing the struggles of the U.S. workforce and the benefits of immigration, right? As I said, once we have a similar approach to the issue, we engage jointly and go to Congress. We have meetings with members of Congress where we show them the great support that they would have from the business leaders, from the business leaders if they support immigration. The same thing we do with faith leaders and national security leaders who may be concerned that the United States needs to attract more students in the STEM fields in order to remain competitive vis-a-vis the other economic and military competitors of the United States, right? China, Russia. Also, we engage with law enforcement leaders in the country, sheriffs who know firsthand the importance of having the trust and the friendship with the immigrant communities, because they need to report crimes. They if they are afraid of reporting crimes, if they are afraid of not being engaged with the community, it creates an unsafe situation. So we go with these sheriffs, with members of Congress, showing them that these national security leaders, law enforcement leaders, are in favor of passing a bipartisan immigration reform.
Gotcha. And for listeners, how can they reach out to National Immigration Forum?
Yeah, great question, Eric. If you want to reach out to us, you can read our papers, you can send us emails. You can find us at immigrationforum.org. You will find my email and the emails of many of my colleagues. Feel free to send us an email if we can help you in any way. If you have any ideas that we can work together, we would be more than happy. It's always a pleasure chatting with my friends here from Envoy, who do a phenomenal job trying to build those bridges and trying to keep the conversation at a point where we want to see the best for the United States immigration system.
It's been great chatting with you today, Arturo. Final question, and I'll turn it back over to you to wrap things up. We're still early enough in the year where I feel like I could ask you this, but if you have 1-2 predictions for immigration this year, what would they be?
I want to see a protection for dreamers passing. Perhaps this is something that will be catalyzed by an imminent ruling from the courts, perhaps from the Supreme Court. We don't know. So I think this is a process that might catalyze the need to pass something to protect dreamers in the United States who are critical for the economies, for the communities where they live. It's essential to pass and find a legislative solution for dreamers. This is something that cannot depend on the administration anymore, and I'm willing to see the political will on both parties to pass something that protect dreamers. Also, we're crossing fingers and working very hard at the National Immigration Forum to see a protection for all those Afghan evacuees who were evacuated from Afghanistan after the Taliban took over. They don't have many options or alternatives to come here to the United States, so we're pushing for an Afghan Adjustment Act where we're trying to help them have a legal status in the United States without having to go through parole or asylum. We want to protect them because that's one of the promises that the United States government made for them. So I'm not sure if this is a prediction, but more a wish. Hopefully we can see those two bills pass this year.
Gotcha. Great. And so you mentioned where the immigrationforum.org. Anything else you wanted to shout out or highlight before we sign off?
I just want to thank you, everyone out there working on the immigration advocacy space. It's I realize how difficult it is to celebrate. We have to celebrate even the smallest victories, but to know that you will find allies and partners in the National Immigration Forum. We share we are fighting for that common goal, and also, keep in mind, all of you, even those of you who are not perhaps engaged with the immigration advocacy world, the importance of immigrants, despite the economy, despite the population. Just think of those neighbors of you with whom you watch soccer or enjoy a beer, or for instance, today I had the most delicious lunch at a Thai restaurant, Bo Thai here, run by immigrants, operated by immigrants. So even gastronomically, it makes sense to bring more immigrants. Immigrants make America stronger. There is a lot of space for them to be here, both geographically and economically. So thanks again for the space, and let's keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you so much for hopping on this episode of Immigration Mobility, Arturo. Number 2, we'll have you on in the future. Love chatting with you.
It was a pleasure chatting with you too, Eric. Thank you very much.
To our friends at Switching Board, thank you so much for hosting us, and thank you all for tuning in.